Thought I had that new one fixed, but I guess not. So, please pray with me. May these words that I speak be grounded in my soul, encouraged by the God presence in me. And may these words that you hear be captured by your soul, enlivened by the God presence in you. Amen. Conservative evangelist Pat Robertson made big headlines in 2010 when he claimed the Haitians' pact with the devil caused God to bring judgment on them with the catastrophic earthquake that killed tens of thousands and crippled an already very poor country. His words went viral within hours, with many, many Christians supporting his view, and many more rational people, including a few Christians, deploring his words. I was deeply, deeply offended that a fellow Christian would see God as one who would meddle in the world from time to time to kill people. If that is God, then I want nothing to do with God. What would be the point of believing in a vindictive, judgmental God whose wrath would instill fear in people? I cannot believe that we were created to live lives in fear, as if our time on earth is some kind of sadistic test of will. And yet, if we believe that Jesus did actually calm the stormy sea, that the power of God has power over nature, then we must also believe that God causes hurricanes, tsunamis, and earthquakes. This was the God that Mark, our gospel writer, believed in. But I suspect that most of us here today no longer believe in that kind of God. Last summer, one of my sermons was titled, God is Not in Control. Over 50 copies of that sermon went out the doors of this building. It obviously struck nerves. But I believe God is not in control because that is the only way that I can accept God. A God that is in control, that brings disease to some, poverty to others, and catastrophes, both physical and emotional, at random, doesn't make sense to me. I don't believe that God is a being out there somewhere that does those kinds of things, but rather that God is the very ground of being itself, in us, among us, beyond us. The spirit of love and healing in our lives, in our world, and in our universe. For me, Jesus didn't actually calm a raging sea, even if Mark might have believed that he could have. But rather, this is the beginning of a long, metaphoric narrative to show us the power of the Spirit of Jesus and the potential power of the Spirit of God in each and every one of us. The common factor in all four stories we heard today is fear. It's fear. The disciples in the boat are afraid. The people witnessing the demoniac healing are afraid. Jairus, the leader of the synagogue, is afraid. The woman who touches Jesus' robe is afraid. Jesus keeps saying, he says it 4 times in this passage, do not be afraid. Mark is telling us 4 times that Jesus, living fully in the Spirit of love, fully in the Spirit of God, was never afraid. And every person can experience that kind of healing from fear to love. I think Mark begins with a stormy sea to show us that this and all that follows in these stories is metaphor for the storms, the illnesses, and the struggles of our lives. It's not about just a raging sea. It's about the storms of our lives. And so picture this. They're in the boat. The wind is howling. The waves are swelling beyond imagining. It's swamping the boat. The disciples would be screaming and yelling, "Get this, do that, bail here." And Jesus is asleep in the back of the boat? I don't think so. I don't think so. Jesus was at peace in the midst of the fears and worries of life. He had learned to live in love rather than fear. And so even as the crowds grew, that he could hardly walk anymore without being stepped on, and even as the hostility towards him became more and more evident from the authorities, he remained calm and at peace because he lived in God. "Why are you afraid?" he says. "Have you no faith?" And it wasn't that God would swoop down and save them from life's storm, but rather that choosing to live in God, every moment of our lives in God, allows one to move peacefully through life's storms, whatever is thrown at us, from a leaky roof to a Category 5 hurricane. Mark, setting the example with the stormy sea, then introduces us to the demoniac, where Jesus calms a very stormy mind. And I think Mark uses an extreme example just to make sure we understand this is metaphor. The man lives among the tombs, an outcast, and is so anguished that nothing could contain him, not chains or shackles. He howled. He beat himself with stones. As metaphor, how often do we do that to ourselves, beat ourselves with stones? I do it all the time. And remembering that Mark is writing within years, maybe only a year, of Rome's rampage through Palestine, where they destroyed the temple, we get some political commentary in this story as well, because that is the root of their fear. The people lived in fear of the Roman Empire, their conquerors, who controlled them by instilling fear. Sure, they brought peace to the land, but it was peace through an army. It was peace through fear. And so the name of the unclean spirit in this wild man is Legion. Legion. A direct reference to the Roman army. And that spirit, where does he ask to be sent? Into the swine herd. An unclean animal for Jews, but eaten by every Roman soldier. Metaphor. The people are afraid when they see the demoniac healed and want Jesus to leave immediately because they are afraid to stand against Rome. Oh my goodness, what is he doing? The demoniac has his life restored, healed, now able to return to the community, to his community. But he wants to follow Jesus, and Jesus insists that he return to his friends, return to his community, because that's what healing is about, being restored to your family, to your community. And Jesus wants him to tell them about the power of the Spirit of God, the compassion that was shown. And here we have the final political comment, because the demoniac, now clothed and in his right mind, went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis, the 10 Roman cities of the region. And he went there without fear, filled with love, to spread the word of all that Jesus had done for him. And then finally, Mark gives us a story within a story about 2 miraculous healings. And once again, it is important to see these as part of this developing metaphor on storm. Jesus has come back across the sea, and Jairus, who was a leader in the synagogue, and you have to picture this. Most of the stories we've heard so far about the synagogue, they're against Jesus, but he's at his wit's end. He's tried everything. His daughter is dying, and he comes to Jesus. His 12-year-old daughter. And Jesus agrees to go to his house. While on their way to Jairus' house, a woman in the crowd following him has been ill for 12 years. 12 years of illness, 12 years of life in a young child. The numbers are symbolic. This woman has exhausted all of her funds trying to find a cure and is now destitute. She was considered unclean by her community because of this blood disease that she had, this hemorrhaging. She would not have been permitted in the synagogue, probably Jairus' synagogue, and she would have been removed from the community. She was not to have contact with anyone, family or friend or stranger. This kind of illness was social death in the Mediterranean world. And she is healed by touching the hem of Jesus' garment. Meaning is restored to her life because Jesus welcomed her back into the community, saying, "Daughter, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed." Not cured. She found her God Spirit by encountering Jesus, God Spirit. So then Mark returns us to the young girl by having someone from the house announce that it's too late and she has died. And Jesus says to Jairus, "Do not be afraid, only believe." And Mark then has Jesus perform the super miracle of super miracles by bringing the young girl back from death. And I caution that we are in the same dilemma as the raging stormy sea if we see this as a physical resurrection, because that would mean that God would choose to save one life and not another. Rather, as metaphor, it becomes a death of inner spirit, or a death of family relationship, or any of the other number of deaths brought on by the storms in our lives. This seems to be what Mark is suggesting, because Jesus ends this encounter by telling her family to give her something to eat. It's bringing her back to the table. It's a sign of healing, a sign of being restored to her place in the family and in the community from whatever death she was facing. In all of this, Mark, I believe, is saying that Jesus is the way. He is not the way to God. Rather, Jesus the way to find and restore meaning to our lives by living in God. By living in God. The way of Jesus calms storms and brings peace. 4 stories of super miracles help us to see, if we are willing to look, how living in God heals and restores life in miraculous ways. Jesus' way is profoundly simple, for he was a powerfully simple man. For Jesus, it was never about holding to the right beliefs to get to God. It was always about letting go of fear and opening to love, that we might live in God. Super miracles. Simple man. Amen.